Hi there and welcome back to Scratch with Mr. Caldwell. So in the last video I showed you how to create your backdrops, and you'll remember that each backdrop has the correct label and it has the correct name on the actual backdrop. So when we're running our program and testing our program, we'll be able to see that we're going to the correct backdrops. The next thing we need to do, according to our plan, is we need to create the navigation buttons. We've created the backdrops. Now we have to provide our users with a way to move through those backdrops. And as you can see, we're going to start with the home buttons that will take our users to each of the backdrops. So that's where we'll start. Next, after that, we'll create our home buttons, and then we'll create our next and back buttons. So here in Scratch, you can see that we have no sprites, but we have 6 backdrops. So we need to create, first of all, our 6 buttons for the home screen. So we want to create a new sprite, because a button is a sprite. We could either choose the sprite from a library, which we're going to do. We could create our own button, or we could upload a button, and I'm going to show you how to do that soon. So we're going to get a button from the library, and we're also going to get a button that we make in another program. So let's click on the little sprite icon here, and our first button is going to be button 2. And we're just going to make 5 buttons like that. So I click on this. Now, we are not going to import 5 buttons. What we're going to do is we're going to absolutely create this first button. We're going to code it, and then we're going to duplicate it. And that's going to save us a lot of time. If we duplicate the coded button, we don't have to recreate all the code. We just have to change some different numbers or variables. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place this button where I want it, and which will be at the top of the screen here under home, because I'm going to have 5 more under it. It's about the center, that's all good. Alright, the first thing you want to do is you want to name this button exactly what you want. So I'm going to click on the little I. I'm going to come over, I'm going to change it from button 2, and I'm going to call it home BD1. Alright, now I know that that is the home button, and it'll take me to backdrop 1. Next, I come up to costumes. Alright, and I've got 2 costumes. Now later on, when you get good at Scratch, you'll be able to program it so when the button's clicked on, it changes colors. But look, we're just going to delete this orange one for now. Let's just have this one, and we need to put a new label on it. Now what you'll notice with this button, it is already in vector mode, so you don't need to change it. We'll come up to text, and we're going to write BD1. Alright. Now, that button looks pretty good on stage. The only thing is we need to give it a correct name here. It's costume name. So we'll just call it home BD1, and we'll call it _1. Now that our button is ready, we can start coding it. We need to think about 3 very important things. What happens when this program is started? What happens when the button is clicked? And what happens when the backdrops change? So those are the 3 things. So the first thing we're going to do is the event when our program starts. So I'm going to do the green flag to start our program. And the first thing I want to happen is I want the backdrop to always be on the home backdrop when this program starts. So I'm going to go to looks. About 9 blocks down, you'll see switch backdrop 2. And we drag that out. It says backdrop 5 now, but I'm going to go home. So this is basically saying when we start the program, switch the backdrop to home. Now remember, our first question is, what do we want the sprite to do when our program starts, or when the green flag is clicked? Well, we want this button to always go to this spot on the stage. So I go to motion and I go to X, Y, and you can see that the numbers in the X and the Y are exactly where this button is. So this is very important. Always move your buttons to where you want them to be before you code them that you want to be there. Alright, as it is, my program will start and my users will be able to move the button away from there. I don't want that to happen. So a trick is to go to Control and to put the go to into a forever loop. So we grab our forever loop, and we put the go to in there, and we attach it. So now when I run my code, see it's running, I try and move the button, it will always go back to that position on the stage. And we're going to do that to all of the buttons eventually. Alright, the next question is, what do we want to happen to the sprite when the button is clicked? So I go to Events, when the sprite is clicked, and when the sprite is clicked, I want the backdrop to change to backdrop 1. So I go to Looks, remember about 9 down is switch to backdrop, and I change it to backdrop 1. Now, when it does go to backdrop 1, if we go to our plan, you will see that I do not need this button on backdrop 1. I only need it on the home screen. So when it does switch to backdrop 1, I need to hide this button. So when the sprite is clicked, switch backdrop to backdrop 1 and hide. And that will ensure that when the backdrop is on backdrop 1, this button will be hidden. The next question is, what do we want the sprite, or BD1, to do when we go to each of the backdrops? So we come over to Events and we go when backdrop switches to, and that's the 4th block down, and I choose Home. Well, whenever we go back to the home, I want BD1 to show. I always want it to be showing on the home button. So I go to Looks and I go Show. Now, I need to do this for each of the backdrops. So when backdrop switches to BD1 or backdrop 1, so duplicate. Here we go. I'm going to change that to BD1. I can get rid of the show. Now you might be thinking, but we already did that up here. But sometimes people go from a different backdrop to BD1 and we want it to hide. So now we have to do this for each of the other backdrops. So I'm going to duplicate and backdrop 2, I want it to hide, duplicate, backdrop 3, I want it to hide, duplicate, backdrop 4, I want it to hide and duplicate, backdrop 5, I want it to hide. So that will ensure that BD1 only shows up on the home screen and is hidden on all the other screens. Now there is something else you can add to this code just to make sure that when the program is started, the button shows up. And that is, grab a little show and just drop it underneath there. Looking at our backdrop button, we can see when the program starts, it will switch the backdrop to home, it will show BD1, and BD1 will go to that position and can't be moved. When BD1 is clicked, it'll switch to backdrop 1 and BD1 will hide. And it's going to do that for all the other backdrops except for the home backdrop. Now, we have coded BD1. The good news is we don't have to do any more coding. We can duplicate BD1 and just change the things that we need to change. Let me show you. I'm not going to duplicate another one until I've shown you how to change up the second button. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is change its costume. The good news is Scratch has changed it to Home BD2, which is exactly what we want. I come up to costumes. It's called BD1-1. I'll just change that to BD2 because that's what this button is. Come down, double click on the 1, change that to 2. You'll notice instantly on the stage we now have BD1 and 2. And it is perfect. This is exactly what we want. I come up to script and there are a few things that we need to change. So the first thing we can do in our code is we actually only need this first block on BD1, not on BD2. So I'm just going to pull that down and delete that. So when the program starts, I want BD2 to go to this position, not BD1's position. So I'm going to get rid of that go-to. I'm going to go down to motion, and you'll notice that go-to is set for BD2. There we go, look at that. So I'd simply replace it in there. Now you'll remember our second important question is, when the sprite is clicked, switch backdrop to, oh, well we want it to switch to backdrop 2, not backdrop 1, so I change that, and we want it to hide. Perfect, very good. Next question, what do we want to happen when backdrop switches to home? Well, we want button 2 or BD2 to show up. Good, we got that. When backdrop switches to BD1, well, we want it to hide. When it switches to BD2, we want it to hide, and so on. So amazingly, we've created BD2 button just like that. And now I'm going to do this for BD3. So duplicate, and you'll notice it comes with a code. So I come up to costumes. I'll change its costume name to 3 right there. I'll double click on the 2. I'll change it to 3. And you'll notice it is 3 now. I'll move it that one into position. I'm happy with that. I will come to my script and I need to simply change where it's going to go to. So go to there. Nope. I want it to go to this new position that I got it in. I put it there. When it's clicked, it goes to BD3. I want it to show on the home, and when it changes to all these backdrops, I want it to hide. So that is perfect. I think that's what I want. And I've done that one. Now we'll go through and we'll do them for BD4 and BD5. Okay, so I've done that. Now would be a good time for you just to check that these buttons work. So I'm going to run my code. Yay, they all appear when my program started. Let's check BD1. Yes, it takes me to BD1. Let's stop the program, run it again. BD2, yes. So I'm just going to check each of my buttons and make sure they work and take me to where I want them to. This is very good. There's no bugs so far. And it's working. Remember, as you code a larger project like this, just check it as you go along. Now, as we clicked these buttons, you'll notice I had to stop the program and run it again. That is because in our plan, remember, we had to have home buttons that took us back to home. So what we need to do is create a home button. Again, we don't have to start from scratch. Look, I'm just going to duplicate BD5 because a lot of the code that we need we can just change up. I'm going to come into costumes. I'm going to choose my arrow. I'm going to select it all. I'm going to delete it. Now, from here, I can add. And when I click add, all the sprites come up and I can add it as a costume. So I think it'll be under home. So I'll just scroll down quickly to H. There it is. And it appears as our actual sprite. I'm going to rename its costume here to just simply home. Okay, and we'll call it 1. Now the good news is you only need to create one home button for the whole project. So down here, I'm going to rename the home button. So we'll just call it home. We'll call it home 1. Great. Now we're ready to code it. But because I duplicated it from 5 originally, I have all the code. So this is good news. So I move it to where I want it. Don't worry that it's covering the BD5 button. We just need to get the new go-to position. So I pop that in there. And I don't want it to show on the home screen. I don't need a home button on the home screen. So I get rid of the show. I go to looks and I grab hide. Perfect. So my home button is going to appear there. When we start the program, it will hide. All right, when the sprite is clicked, I want it to always go back to the home button and I want it to hide. So it's hidden on the home screen, just like the start. When the backdrop switches to home, I want it to hide. But when it switches to each one of these, I want it to show because it shows on each of the backdrops. So I simply grab a show, another show, another show, another show, and another show. There we go. Now if I run my program, I should be able to go between the different backdrops and the home. Let's run it and see what happens. Backdrop 1, home button. Very good. Backdrop 2, home button. Backdrop 3, home button. Backdrop 4, home button. Backdrop 5, home button. We've done our home button. Now we need to do our next and back buttons. But if I go into the sprite library, I can't find any back buttons that look any good. You could just use these arrow buttons, but I want one that says next and back on it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you have Microsoft Word on your computer, you simply come to Insert, Shapes, and come down and grab an arrow. So we'll grab an arrow. We don't need to make it too big. All right, we're going to write inside the arrow, N-E-X-T, next, and we have our first next button. All right, I'm just going to copy that and then I'm going to paste it. Whoops. I'm going to format the shape. I'm just going to flip it horizontally and I'm going to say back. Excellent. Now, for some reason, it's made that text black, so I'm going to change it to white. And I've got 2 buttons. Now, how do we get a drawing in Microsoft Word into Scratch? Well, first we have to turn the drawing into a picture. So we right-click on the picture, we go Save As, and you'll see it saves it as a PNG. I'm going to save this as next button and save. And I'll do the same, right click, save as picture. We'll call it back button. Remember that you need to know where you saved it. I save all of mine in downloads. I click save. And now we have pictures that can be used in Scratch. So come back to Scratch. All right, I'm going to duplicate, all right, our home button. I'm going to come into costumes because I want to keep all of that beautiful code. All right, I'm going to delete the home button for this one. All right, and I'm going to come up to import. I'm going to choose my next button. Oh, look at that, there it is, very good. I'll call it next. That's its costume name. All right, I got the next button. I've renamed it. The thing is, I can't see the size of the button. So I come over to the sprite, I right click, and I go show. Now you see this button is way too big. So I'm going to come back to my costume. I'm just going to make it nice and small. And I'm going to bring it back to the center. That's about the size I want. On my stage, I'm going to move it in position, ready for the code. That looks pretty good. I could make the button smaller if I want to. Now, just like the home button, with the code, we only need to code this button once. So when the green flag is clicked, yes, I want it to hide because we're going to be on the home screen. I do not want this button showing on the home screen. I'm going to change its position, so I'll get rid of that go to, come up to motion, grab its new position, drop it in there. Okay, when the sprite is clicked, what do I want to happen? I want it to switch to the next backdrop. So down the bottom, I can choose next backdrop, but I want it to show, all right? I want it to show, so I can get rid of that. I'll go to looks, and I'll go show, because I want it to show on the next backdrop, so that, you know, on the next backdrop, I can go to the next backdrop. So when backdrop switches to home, I want it to hide. When backdrop switches to backdrop 1, I want it to show. On backdrop 2, I want it to show. On backdrop 3 and 4, I want it to show. But if you look at our plan, there is no next button on the last backdrop because there's no next backdrop. So with that in mind, I take away the show and I want it to hide on the last backdrop. Perfect. Okay, this looks pretty good. I'm going to run a test of my next button. Okay, we're running the program. I go to backdrop 1. Yes, my home button's there. That's good, that works. My next button clicks through to each backdrop. Now you can see why we labeled the backdrops. And backdrop 5, it isn't there, so that's perfect. Now what we need to do is import the back button and do the exact same to that. So I'm going to duplicate the next button. I come up to the costumes. I'll change it to back. I will come down. I will delete that picture. I will import my back button that I made. Very good. You can see it is miles too big, so I'm going to resize that to about the same size as my next button. That looks pretty good. I bring it to the center and then I drag it to exactly where I want. I'm happy with it there. Just remember, when you're doing your own programming, you might make these buttons bigger or smaller. And now I come over here. I'm going to call this back. All right, just so I don't get confused. And I'm ready to code this one. All right. Obviously, I want it to hide on the home screen. I want it to go to a different position. So I'm going to get rid of this. Go into motion. Go to next. When the sprite is clicked, I want it to go to the previous backdrop and I want it to show. When backdrop switches to home, I want it to hide. When backdrop switches to backdrop 1, I want it to hide. because you look at our plan. Again, there's no need for a back button on backdrop 1. You have a home button that does the same thing. No point doubling up. So I'm going to actually switch these two around because I do want it to show on backdrop 5. All right, let's run our code. I think this is it. I think it's looking pretty good. I think we can run our code. Let's have a look. Backdrop 1, next. Yes, I can go through. Does our back button work? Yes, our back button works. Next, 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 next. Yep, there's a back button there. Back button works. Home button works. Everything works perfectly. Very good. Okay, folks, so that is completed it. We've done our backdrops and we've done our buttons. So just some key points there. Remember to label your sprites so that you know what they are. Remember to label the costumes so that you know what they are. Remember to label your backdrops. Remember, create your code for one of your sprites. If you have sprites that do a similar thing, you can just duplicate and change the variables or whatever you need to change. All right, you'll save yourself a lot of time like that. Okay, so that's this project done. If you have any questions, you can email me and I'll help you out. No problems at all. Bye for now.